Hey, Frog fans, welcome into another episode of Frogs Insider presented by the Flying T Club. Jamie Plunkett here alongside Melissa Treebwasser, as always, ready to talk about the latest and the greatest in and around the world of TCU athletics. And Melissa, today, this episode number 119, we are talking about two more Horned Frogs hitting that NFL draft, hearing their names called. A good number of Frogs get phone calls after the draft is over, and we have, rounding into form, another class of NFL Pro Frogs coming into shape.
I could not be more excited for this group of guys. I think the caption on Jack Bech's Instagram post from TCU was, "You can hear this photo," and I've never felt a caption to be more accurate than that particular one.
Absolutely. It's just really cool to see. We're going to talk about Jack Bech going to the Raiders, Savion Williams going to the Green Bay Packers, all of the UDFA signings and rookie minicamp invites from fellow Horned Frogs on this episode of Frogs Insider. First, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, Flying T Club. They are TCU's NIL collective. We're going to talk a lot more about them later in the show, but shout out to our presenting sponsor. They've been excellent partners with us this athletic season. The folks over at Flying T are good, dedicated Horned Frogs who are working their tails off to make TCU student athletes' lives better, along with folks in the community in and around the city of Fort Worth. So big thanks to the Flying T Club.
I think it's important to mention, too, as Mike Buddy mentioned in his Buddy System newsletter this week, that just because things are moving in-house does not mean that you should not be giving to Flying T now. So there's a lot of work that can be done between now and the finalization of that house settlement. And so if you have lots of questions on what that's going to look like, please read the Buddy System edition number 2 that went out. Should be in your email boxes. Check your spam folder. Mine gets lost there occasionally. But I thought he did a really good job of kind of giving some talking points as to what that's going to look like for TCU and for the Flying T Club. But now is the time, folks. Now is the time to fill those coffers.
Certainly is. It certainly is. FlyingTClub.com is where you can go and do that with the Flying T Club. We're also part of Dave Campbell's Texas Football's Republic of Football Network, where you get your podcasts. Wherever you get your podcasts, search Republic of Football Network, and you will find our feed. It's our show, along with a show for every other D1 football program in the state of Texas. A really fun network to be a part of. Love interacting with the other podcasts on the network. And, last episode or a couple episodes ago, Melissa, we talked about some of these future home games coming up for TCU against Sam Houston State and Texas State and future football seasons. Maybe we're going to be able to get together with the Sam Houston State and Texas State podcasts in the Republic of Football Network to break down those games, preview those games, and everything in between. Really, really excited to continue being partners with Dave Campbell's Texas Football in that organization. Melissa,
Jamie.
Jack Bech,
Yeah.
first Horned Frog off the board in 2025, 58th pick overall in the second round to the Las Vegas Raiders. Frankly, we can talk about all of the extra storylines, and we're going to get into that here in a second. Just from a fit perspective, I think this is an excellent landing spot for Jack Bech. The Raiders did some issues with their wide receivers core the last couple of years. Obviously, Devontae Adams asking to get traded a couple years ago. He ends up in the Jets, and now who knows what his next stop is. Jacoby Myers has been over there. Hunter Renfrow has been over there recently. They haven't gotten a lot of production out of the wide receiver room. Tight end with Brock Bowers, feeling great. Obviously, the Raiders took Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State, in the first round of the NFL draft on Thursday night. So they've got a really stellar running back to go along now with Jack Bech, who should be able to step in, Melissa, and find a role, carve out a role for himself here pretty quickly on.
I would not be surprised whatsoever if Jack Bech is starting in the first game of the regular season. You mentioned Hunter Renfrow. He's gone. He moved on to the Panthers, I believe, today, signed as a free agent. And so there is just not a lot of wide receivers of note on that roster right now. There's not anybody that stands out. There's no giant contracts, the guys that you have to play. You have a chance. You mentioned that they drafted Ashton Jeanty, and obviously they have arguably the best young tight end in the league right now in Brock Bowers, and that three-headed monster to pair with Geno Smith, who, isn't one of those guys that's going to blow you away with just sheer arm talent, but it's a really smart quarterback that's pretty accurate. Jack Bech is exactly the kind of receiver, young receiver that you want if you're a Geno Smith, especially with that run game and that tight end. So to me, when I saw it, I know a lot of people were kind of worried because it does feel like a dysfunctional organization at times. But remember, Pete Carroll is the head football coach there. Geno Smith is going to bring a lot of stability to the quarterback position. I really think for Jack, and because of Jack's maturity, I don't worry about him going to Vegas whatsoever. I don't think that's an issue. I know it can be and has been for some of those young players, but I think this is an opportunity for him to be in a system that suits his skill set, to be with a quarterback that is going to rely heavily on him, and to be around two other young, incredibly dynamic offensive skill position players that can help him. They can all kind of grow together and become, I think, an elite kind of triangle of talent there in Vegas.
I think so. I mean, you have Jacoby Myers, who's the veteran of the group, 7-year veteran in the league. He was their leading receiver last year. You've got Trey Tucker, who's been in the league for a couple years, more of a deep threat, more of a burner, who is really undersized at only 5'9" listed, right? So he's kind of in that Darius Davis mold of kick returner, deep threat, burner. And then you've got a lot of really unproven names in this wide receiver room. You've got Alex Bachman, Jeff Foreman, Shedrick Jackson, fellow rookie Dante Thornton Jr., Kyle Phillips, Tyrellic McAllister. Like, this is an unproven wide receivers room, and we know Jack's work ethic. We've seen it the last 2 seasons. We know that, as tragic of a story as it is, he now has more motivation. He was just on Ryan Clark's podcast last week, The Pivot, talking about how his brother Tiger is forever going to be his inspiration and his motivation in a different way now. And I think when you have a guy who already had a different level of work ethic ingrained in him, and now he has gone through a really heartbreaking family tragedy, I don't see how you bet against a guy like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. I wouldn't want to. I think just if he wasn't already focused enough, like you said, we've seen this just super elite commitment and dedication since the tragic passing of his brother Tiger, and that's to a guy that was already really focused and dedicated. So,
yep.
And if there's something that we know, kind of getting back to the on the field thing, if you look at when the Seahawks were really successful under Pete Carroll, it was riding Marshawn Lynch until they didn't. And probably the worst play call in the history of the Super Bowl. But, if Marshawn Lynch apparently immediately, it was like banging down Pete Carroll's door, like, you better draft Ashton Genty. But their wide receivers are going to be expected to block. And we know what a proficient blocker Jack Bech is all the way down the field. We know what a great route runner he really became, I think, over the course of his collegiate career. And how good he is at winning contested balls and being physical at the point of attack. And so I fully expect him to use his internal and intrinsic motivation along with his incredible physical gifts to be a contributor really early on for a team that nobody's going to be paying attention to in that division. And so they have a chance to really kind of sneak up on some people, I think, and put together a good season. Tough division. Obviously, you have the Chiefs, you have the Chargers. He's going to get to see some other Horned Frogs quite a bit between those two teams. And so it's not going to be an easy road for Vegas, but it feels like they're building the right way. And Pete Carroll might be a little past his prime, but as a player's coach, I think that's exactly where you want to be for a young player that wants to get reps early.
Yeah, and you talk about his blocking, his ability to block, his physicality. Had the lowest drop rate of any P4 receiver in the country last year, just 1.1%. And then his route tree, like you mentioned, he's so versatile. And some of that's through just his different experiences in college. He was a tight end at LSU for 2 seasons before coming to TCU, moving to the slot initially, and then really by necessity moving all the way outside. And so he has had so much different experience in his college career. I think that's going to lend to him kind of hitting the ground running in the NFL. And it's pretty cool too to be able to say that Tom Brady signed off on a team drafting you, right? The GOAT of all GOATs, saying, yeah, that's the wide receiver that we should go and get in the 2nd round.
Yeah, it's awesome. I couldn't be more excited. I can't wait for them to release the schedule. Listen, do any of us really need an excuse to take a weekend trip to Vegas in the fall? No.
Absolutely not.
Do we have a pretty dang good one now? Yeah, I think we do. So I think it's a great situation. Obviously, I think it almost becomes kind of a meme during the draft about how they can't wait to tell the tragic stories of all of these young athletes, and obviously. Jack's story has been well told now for almost 4+ months. But the thing I think that's really special is not just Jack's willingness to kind of relive this tragic event, but his desire and need to constantly say Tiger's name. I think that's really the way that he has used that. Like you said, not just to motivate himself, but to try to bring encouragement to so many. I mean, what an incredible family the Beshes are, and just what an incredible young man he is. So I know every TCU fan is going to be rooting so hard for Jack, and I know that he is going to very, very quickly make a lot of new fans with their Raiders fan base, who, for all of their flaws, are one of the most enthusiastic fan bases in the NFL. So
Yes.
I think that is going to be just a really cool situation for him, and I think he's going to absolutely thrive there. And it's kind of cool that both of the TCU receivers went to two of like the biggest and best fan bases in the league.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. Just one more note about Bech before we get into Savon Williams. Bech was the 8th overall wide receiver taken in this draft. He is the 5th second-round draft pick for TCU in the last 7 NFL drafts. In the first one since Steve Avila went to the Rams in 2023. So TCU continuing to pump out incredible second-round talent in the NFL draft, which is something that not a lot of teams do terribly consistently year over year. And then, yeah, of course, if Jack Bech was the 8th wide receiver taken in the NFL draft, that would make Savion Williams the 13th wide receiver taken in the NFL draft, because that's just the numbers that they were. I counted. It's not like
So it's not an
one
if
led
then.
to the other.
Yeah.
It's not an if-then statement. But as light as the wide receiver room is in Las Vegas, that's about how full the wide receiver room feels in Green Bay. So it made this pick of Savion Williams in the 3rd round, number 87 overall, pretty interesting for the Packers when you consider the fact that they signed Mecole Hardman this offseason, and that was already adding to a room that had Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, and Dontavion Wicks, along with a couple other names. And yeah, Christian Watson's banged up, but all those other guys played pretty consistently and are already really chomping at the bit for more snaps. I'm not sure what Green Bay's plan is overall for Savion here, but I think they're really going to lean into his versatility that he showed as a senior at TCU.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that's interesting to look at, if you look at that wide receiver room, like you mentioned, super, super stacked, a lot of good young talent, but a lot of those guys will be going into their last year of their current contracts. And so I think Green Bay will have some decisions to make, especially, I think Christian Watson is such an interesting case because he's been so dynamic when healthy, but has also dealt with a lot of injuries over the course of his career. And so this may be a situation where obviously that's not a one-to-one player comp, but where you say, hey, is this a guy that we can kind of develop? Because for Savion's physical gifts, there were some questions about his hands. We did see that kind of throughout his career. There's some questions about, where is his best position? Because he, again, was another guy who played literally everywhere for TCU when it comes to skill positions. And so you can kind of afford to develop him when he's really inexpensive and see what you have. But I do think because, the Packers have had a really solid running game, but they haven't necessarily always had that consistency. And another couple of guys who have dealt with some injuries, Josh Jacobs, a former Raider, is getting kind of on the downside of his running back career with 7 years in the league. So, maybe this is where you can kind of say, hey, we're going to throw him in the backfield occasionally. We're going to split him into that H-back kind of a role, split him out wide. Maybe he becomes kind of a gadget player in year one with minimal snap opportunities. But if you continue to see him develop and kind of address some of those weak areas in his overall game, he could be a contributor. And Jordan Love's be a pretty fun guy to play with, I think, if you're Savion Williams.
You got to, just athleticism abounds in that backfield, no matter who you have back there. Like you said, Josh Jacobs has been a little banged up. He's getting older. Marshawn Lloyd is the only real other running back that's still on the roster because the Packers parted ways with A.J. Dillon this offseason, and he missed this whole past season anyways with an injury, and he was kind of the hammer when you think back to those recent Packers teams when it was Aaron Green, or not Aaron Green, the guy who was with the Vikings this year, the running back with the Vikings this year, and AJ.
If you hadn't asked me, I would have known. But
it's true. Anyways, the Vikings' number one running back this year and A.J. Dillon, when they were kind of the 1-2 punch up in Green Bay. I think Savion could be another 1-2 punch kind of player for the Packers. I also think, and this is something that we got asked in our 40 burning questions prior to TCU's season, it's a comp that has stuck with both of us over the course of the year, especially with how Kendall Briles and Sonny Dykes used Savion all season. Do we see like a little bit of a Debo Samuel package for Savion in Green Bay? Let him start to really kind of move side to side, attract some attention from the defenses, keep people off of Jordan Love, and just have a little bit of gravity, not just because he's a true wide receiver, but because you don't know what's going to happen when you put the football in his hands. So that's something interesting to look forward to, especially when camp starts up in the NFL.
Well, and Matt LaFleur, the coach of the Green Bay Packers, is one of those kind of offensive savants, right? He's one of those guys who likes to do some different things. He's looking for different ways to kind of game the system a little bit. And so Savion could be, maybe not a conventional choice when you look at drafting another wide receiver, but a guy that he could envision having a Debo Samuel type role in Green Bay. And so I do think he'll get opportunities. I would imagine that Jack Bech gets considerably more touches than Savon Williams does in their rookie season. And I think that's fine. I think Savion is going to have an opportunity to grow and develop, and I do think he's a guy that's going to have a long career in the NFL. Also somebody with a really incredible story that he shared some photos from when his daughter was born early on in his tenure at TCU and the heart issues that she dealt with. And so, he's a guy that had plenty of opportunities to leave, had plenty of schools wanting him there. But because of his family, because of his daughter's health concerns, and because of his commitment to TCU, he stayed and he developed and he put in the time. And another guy who just did whatever was asked of him. I mean, there's not a lot of wide receivers in this day and age that you say, hey, I'd like you to line up in the backfield for 20 snaps or 15 snaps or whatever a game and take all that wear and tear on your body, that are NFL prospects that would say yes. And even though he talked about how banged up he was at the end of the season, he kept playing through it. He kept fighting and he kept doing whatever it took for the team to win. And so, again, like TCU fans 100% will be rooting for Savion. And I do think he's another guy that will be just kind of arms wide open welcome by a fan base.
Jack Bech, Savon Williams, two of the newest Pro Frogs out of TCU's football program. Very excited to see what they do in their NFL careers. We're going to take a quick break here at Frogs Insider, and then we will be back to talk about some other Horned Frogs who had a couple interesting phone calls after this game. And then I've got a big question that I haven't told Melissa about that I want her answer to. So let's do that next. Hey Frog fans, Jamie Plunkett here, one of the hosts of Frogs Insider, and I wanted to take a second and talk to you about our presenting sponsor, the Flying T Club. The Flying T Club is an incredible organization. It's TCU's NIL collective, the only NIL collective for TCU, and they support over 130 student athletes wearing purple, loud and proud. They partner these student athletes with organizations in and around the city of Fort Worth, giving back to the Fort Worth community, making our community stronger and better. If you want to learn more about how you can support the Flying T Club's efforts and by proxy support TCU student athletes, all you've got to do is go to flyingtclub.com. That's flyingtclub.com and check out the different ways that you can get involved with that organization. I've known the folks over at the FTC for a really long time, and they're incredible people. They're dedicated Horned Frogs. They bleed purple through and through, and they want to get to know you and see how you can partner with them to make the best of TCU student athletes' lives while they're on campus and in Fort Worth. The work they do stretches well beyond TCU's campus as well, partnering with multiple nonprofit organizations. If you have any opportunity to give, I would encourage you to do so over at flyingtclub.com. All right, Frog fans, welcome back. We are Frogs Insider, presented by the Flying T Club. Big thanks to the Flying T Club for their partnership with us. Melissa, Jack Bech, Savon Williams were kind of the headliners for TCU football when it comes to the 2025 NFL Draft, but there were a good number of Horned Frogs who signed UDFA contracts and a couple more who got rookie minicamp invites. I'm just going to kind of read them off real quick, and then you can kind of pick and choose where we start based on the names that kind of intrigue you the most. So we have, obviously, defensive back Scud James, Lamarian James, signed a UDFA contract with the Cleveland Browns. J.P. Richardson, a wide receiver who doesn't get talked about enough because of some of the other wide receivers on TCU's roster the last couple of seasons. He signed with the Chicago Bears. I think that's a really interesting spot for him to land. Safety Abe Kamara gets a rookie minicamp invite to the Carolina Panthers, who made some really interesting moves this offseason. Nana Safamensa, the defensive end, signs a contract with the Seattle Seahawks. You have Bless Harris, left tackle for the Horned Frogs last year, getting a rookie minicamp invite to Las Vegas with the Raiders. He's going to be a teammate with Jack Bech, at least for a little bit there. And then long snapper Brent Matisic signs a contract with the Cleveland Browns as well. A lot of interesting fits there, a lot of interesting names there out of TCU's football program that are going to get their shot at the next level.
Yeah, and I want to start with J.P. Richardson, like you mentioned, another interesting fit. Chicago is another super young team that is really trying to build talent around Caleb Williams, who struggled, in his rookie campaign here, and looks like he needs some time to develop. They have put as much around him as they possibly can. They obviously they drafted Rome Odunze, alongside Caleb Williams. They brought in Luther Burden, who people thought was a little bit of a steal, being available. Some people thought he'd be a first rounder. They have the burner from Texas and Devin Duvernay. I mean, there's a lot of talent that wide receiver room, but JP is the kind of guy every young quarterback needs, and that you know exactly where he's going to be at the end of his route. You know, if you put the ball within his reach, he's probably going to catch it. And for a team with a lot of young guys, this is an experienced special teams guy who can play both as a returner in kicks and punts effectively, but also can line up and be a blocker, or will be willing to be a gunner in all of those different roles. So it's going to be it's always tough for an undrafted free agent to make an NFL roster. That is an uphill battle, but he's absolutely a guy I could see kind of sticking on a practice squad and earning a spot, maybe as a special teams player before taking on a bigger role in Chicago. He's just so dang solid and consistent. And for a young quarterback, having solid and consistent is so critically important.
It is. And like you said, this is another pretty deep wide receiver room. I don't know, though, how long some of these other guys are going to be in the room. It's a similar situation with Green Bay, right? DJ Moore, he's in year 8. You've got, a couple of these other guys are a little bit older. Duvernay's in year 6. Miles Boykin's in year 6, right? So Olamide Zaccheaus is in year 7. There might be some opportunity there. And if there isn't in Chicago, and this is the case with all of these guys who signed after the draft was over, the best thing you can do is put your best foot forward regardless of how uphill the battle is, because once you get into the room, people in the league want to keep people in the league, right? And so if you put your best foot forward in Chicago or Carolina or Seattle or wherever you are, and there's just not a roster spot for you, coaches and GMs will make calls and be like, "Hey, we've got this kid. We can't slide him in, but give him a look. He's worth giving a look." And JP Richardson, to me, has the work ethic and the character to be one of those people that, if it doesn't work out in Chicago for whatever reason, if he can't quite carve out a spot for himself there, could probably get a look somewhere else where the receiver situation is a little different.
Yeah, I think he can bounce around the league for a while until he finds a home. I wouldn't bet against them. You know what I will bet against just very consistently is the Browns, which is why it's so unfortunate that two guys that I do think have potential to be on NFL rosters ended up landing there. But like you said, getting in the room is the most important. This is like being a defensive player that gets a 2-star defensive player that gets offered by Gary Patterson, and all of a sudden all the blue chips or blue bloods are calling you, right? Like it's the same kind of situation.
Yeah.
So Lemarion, Scud James, and Brent Matisic. Matisic is a guy who actually got a combine invite. You don't see a lot of long snappers drafted. I think there was 1 or 2 this year. But he's a guy who absolutely, I think, has a professional future in the league.
100%.
But whether or not it's with the Browns, I mean, I hope for his sake, no. But he could stick there. I think Lemarion James really came on late as a guy who might sneak into the 6th or 7th round. So he goes to a spot where that Browns defense is pretty salty, but there's a lot of need, and there's always need for corners that can cover without getting PI calls. And Scud proved himself, especially down the stretch last season, that he can be a top end cover corner. So
Yeah.
I think both of those guys have a shot. It's going to come down to, I just think, a numbers game for both of them, especially Brent, because there's so few long snapper positions available in the league.
I agree, and as it is with all of these, I mean, all of these positions, there are few and far opportunities for most of them. But like you said, with long snappers, it's particularly tight. I think he's got incredible talent. I mean, think about where TCU has been from a special teams perspective in past years, and for the last 3 or 4 seasons, it just hasn't been an issue. There haven't been low snaps on punts. There haven't been bad snaps on field goal attempts. It just hasn't. It has been an afterthought, and that is a testament to how good Brett Matisic has been for the Frogs. So excited to see what he can do in the league. I'm glad Nana landed somewhere that JD is going to have to be put on hold, I guess, for just a little bit while he gets his shot with Seattle. And then Abe Kamara to the Panthers, that's a young team that's really trying to build something. And for him to land there and maybe have a chance to work his way onto the roster and be a part of that secondary, I think that's a really cool opportunity. Plus, kind of gets paired up with a Frog legend there as well, because Andy Dalton is still there as the backup. So Carolina,
and Trey Merrick.
Trayvon Merrick just signed there this offseason as well. That's right. So a couple guys in purple there ready to welcome Abe.
I'm going to make a call. I'm going to make a call right now. I would not be shocked whatsoever if sometime in the next 5 years, Abe Kamara ends up as like the special teams Pro Bowl guy. Okay. If that dude gets and I know like kickoffs are a lot different now. Punts, it's not the same as it was, but that's a guy who I could see becoming an all-pro level special teams kind of player.
And definitely could be like a situational, rundown safety, because we've seen how well he gets downhill and how hard he hits people, and he loves that kind of contact. Absolutely. Melissa, with these last few minutes, though, I wanted to look to the future for TCU football and for the NFL draft in 2026 and beyond. Of the current Horned Frogs roster, who is the next Horned Frog to get drafted?
Oh,
first person to hear their name called, whether that's 26, 27, whenever, you tell me who the next Horned Frog is to get drafted to the NFL. I
feel that it has to be, I want to make sure I get this right here. Hold on. Vamping. I always mix up Devin Deal. I always get the name. I always want to confuse the first names there on the brothers. I think Devin Deal, if he's back to being healthy, because we know he's been a little bit banged up this offseason, but by all accounts seems like he'll be ready to go for fall ball. He is such a dynamic talent. I would not be surprised whatsoever to see him go, in the early rounds. Another guy that I would put on that list is probably, this is tough now because Caleb Elarms feels like another defensive player. Those would probably be the two, and I'm leaving off the obvious offensive one. But
I would say Namdi I think has a chance if he has a good season to hear his name called. But for me, it's Eric McAllister. Yeah. I think Eric McAllister is the next guy wearing purple currently to hear his name called in the NFL draft. I think with the way that we saw him practice this spring, the way he approached practice this spring, he looked like a different guy out there, and kind of embracing that number one receiver role. Obviously, there are big shoes to fill in that role. There are several big shoes to fill in the wide receiver room this season, but I think Eric McAllister has all of the tools and talent necessary to be that guy, and I think that's why we're going to hear his name called next.
Yeah, I would not be shocked whatsoever to see him go in the first 2 rounds a year from now, if he stays healthy and puts together kind of season that we expect from him.
I think that's going to do it, though, for this episode of Frogs Insider presented by the Flying Tea Club. She's Melissa Triebwasser. I am Jamie Plunkett. We will be back tomorrow talking about TCU baseball and their series win over the Baylor Bears. But until then, she's Melissa. I'm Jamie, and we'll talk to you next time. Go Frogs.
Go Frogs.